at the end of the day, being in charge of a political party is all about what you say. And can you actually appeal to people? Can you grab their attention? Can you make them excited? Can you basically motivate them to go out and vote for you? And the current Conservative Party under Kimi Badenoch is just so bad. And all these people who I often see saying, oh, if only Jerrick would have been in, Jerrick would have been so much better. No, Jerrick would have been just as bad. And we would be in this situation where people would be like, oh, if only we had elected Kimi Badenoch, she would be so much better. Partly is, and the whole reason why, is that the Conservative Party has no policies. It has no coherent ideology of what it wants to follow. It has no idea what it wants to do, what it wants to be. And as a result, it's falling to pieces before our very eyes. And it is fascinating to see this happen in real time. And the whole thing with British Steel this weekend is almost a microcosm of them falling apart in real time, where Kimi Badenoch got exposed as having lied about what she did in her time as business secretary, revealing that the Conservatives had no policy on British Steel or even industrial strategy, or even now having anything to say or even anything useful to say about British Steel. Bear in mind, same goes for Reform as well. I know they've been bleating about, oh, if we're in charge, this would have been. Their policies are just as bad, their ideology is just as incoherent. People just haven't realized it yet. But trust me, they will. Anyway, I want to cover this because this came up in Conservative Home. We've had two people talk about it. I nearly went with Harry Phibbs. Again, wonderful name. But he took on, what, Labour has done by nationalising the British Steel is just a terrible idea. His entire argument was you should have just forced the Chinese company to sell it. Even if you sold it, that would not solve the underlying problem that those blast furnaces would have gone out, probably absolutely making someone buy it completely useless. But no, today we've got this. Because this is almost a classic. Not only is it what we are seeing that the now quote conservative talking point that quote Labour are bad. Why are they bad? Oh, they're just bad. Oh, their policies are bad. Or why is his policy bad? Oh, it's just bad. We have a go at people wanting to remain in the EU. And EU status and having a go at the EU. It's a full, honestly, cornucopia of the past 14 years of conservatism and the fact that this is why they are so bad now. So let's dive on into this. But before we do dive on into this, please do remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button down below. And of course, as always, there is the Pony Club down below as well. There's the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link, and of course, there's the YouTube thank you button as well. So let's crack on then into this. Of course, over on Conservative Home, the best comedy website online. So, Andrew Grimson takes to the field with this, saying, has the plight of British steelmakers now reawakened Labour to the cause of the nation state? So, this is in the national interest, Keir Starmer declared on his visit to Scunthorpe on Saturday to promote the plan to save the town's two blast furnaces. Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, informed the Commons on that very same day the government's measures are now unequivocally in our national interest. Even if we were in the EU, this would not have stopped us doing this. We could have still nationalized this being in the EU. We could have still done this in the EU. But anyway, most of course, the Labour MPs who spoke at this debate, used the words, of course, in the national interest. And yes, it was very, very much so in the national interest to have a steelmaking industry. So many businesses, industries, sectors rely on this steel production facility, right through from things like defense to house building to computer components. So much stuff uses steel, and not having that ability means you would have to import that steel, which then makes things even potentially more difficult down the line. So it is absolutely in our national interest to do that. And this guy having a go, saying that, oh, Labour are now saying it's in the national interest. Guess they all believe in the nation state now. Anyway, so Chris McDonald from Stockton North, who has, of course, the merit, of course, of now knowing the greatest amount of steel, said that we are going to, quote, take back control of our steel industry. Harry Phibbs warned yesterday on this website that this, what was happening, of course, is bad economics. But let us look, of course, at the moment for politics. Bear in mind, hey, it was either that article or this one. I think this one's much better. Like Phibbs' article basically comes to the conclusion that we should have forced this Chinese company to sell it, but doesn't acknowledge the fact that the whole reason why we are is because of the economics involved, and that the Chinese company basically said that these two blast furnaces are just completely unprofitable. Hence, they cannot buy the materials. So, again, it's such a foolish argument, but had the Conservatives been in power and that they'd followed maybe Harry Phibbs's economic advice, those two blast furnaces would have gone out. That would have basically killed someone wanting to buy that site, because you've got to spend the next maybe 5 years getting those blast furnaces operational again. Yeah, and that means you aren't making any money for 5 years, bear in mind. I don't know too many businesses that could survive that long. But there you go. Anyway, Grimson now continues with this. One of the benefits of Brexit, again, trying to sell this as a benefit of Brexit is foolish, is that we have now regained the right to make our own mistakes and occasionally learn from them. The book, of course, stops at Westminster, not Brussels, but it always stopped at Westminster. Anyway, what a transformation, of course, this has now forced the Labour Party to, of course, make. It seems only yesterday that Starmer and his friends were, of course, desperate to find some way to take us back into the European Union. The answer to every question was, they insisted, more Europe. This was an article of faith with them. Again, very, very much the anti-Brexit. Oh, yeah, no, they're just giving up all the power to Brussels. That was never the case. Everything that was done in Brussels was mainly to do with regulation. But this guy probably can't talk about regulations because he doesn't really know what regulation he wants to get rid of. He just wants to get rid of them all because, again, he's been told that, if you get rid of all regulations, somehow the market becomes wonderful and everything all just works wonderfully. Anyway, they now proclaim, with impressive unanimity, the principle of national interest. Anyway, Starmer is, of course, a lawyer who has now taken a new brief, diametrically opposed to his previous one. No, it's not at all, especially in this case. And he has every right to do this. It is how our system has, of course, very much long worked. In his brilliant essay on the character of Robert Peel, published back in 1856, Walter Bagehot observed that, of course, public opinion is permeating influence and exacts obedience to itself, which means that, quotes from this, the most influential of constitutional statesmen is one of the most felicitous experiences and creed of the moment, who of course, administers it. Who embodies it in its laws, its institutions? Who gives it the highest life it is even capable of? Who indulges in the average man, of course, to think? I could have not done it any better had, of course, I said it myself at the time. This is, of course, politics of Starmer. He perceives that the public opinion, as of course, has changed, so he changed too. Uh, you look at the polls, people are saying the exact opposite. So who is at the whims of the polls here? But there you go. Anyway, and of course, he makes the greatest possible emphasis the case, which, of course, his client, of course, the British people, now wish him to make. He is, of course, remarkably agile. For lawyers do need to be agile. He wants very much with the rules of the game, of course, to win. There's another characteristic of his profession. He's, of course, fertile in finding precedents on which to help him win the case on which he and his juniors are now working. Could have done this when we were in the EU. We could have done this when we were in the EU. There was nothing stopping anyone from nationalizing British steel had something like this happened. Anyway, the great source of precedents for nationalization is, of course, the Labour government of 1945. Pretty much everything is created and contained either in the word national, as in the National Health Service, or even the British, as in British Railways. They could have, of course, been no doubt of this government's patriotism. Its, of course, leading members had served very loyally in the wartime coalition alongside Churchill, and, of course, Attlee had at least once, as everyone knew, been Mayor Attlee severely wounded during the First World War. Major Attlee served wounded during the First World War. Ernest Bevin, the mighty Foreign Secretary, who served, of course, the creation of an independent British nuclear deterrent, saying we've got to have the bloody Union Jack flying on top of it. Realizing, of course, at once that Stalin must be defied, he, of course, took the lead in, of course, creating NATO and setting up, of course, the free press and free trade unions in the British sector of what became West Germany. So, of course, the greater part of Germany became firmly anchored to the West and helped keep the Russians out. Of course, this guy permanently forgets just how good Germany is, and having Germany as an ally is really good now in these days and age. But perfidious Germany trying to take over the EU. Trust me, I would not be surprised to go back and find out this guy has written some very pro-Brexit arguments around Germany in and around that time. Anyway, Bevin, of course, refused to join the fledgling European coal and steel community, the foreigner of the European Union, and regarded Churchill's very pro-European statements as an attempt to make political capital, not as a guide to what Churchill would actually do. So it provided. And again, the fact that this guy is not, as acknowledged here, one of the biggest fundamental changes in conservative policy has been that since the end of the Second World War, conservatives have been incredibly pro-European. And it wasn't until this Euroscepticism came in when they took over the party and plowed us in this current direction that was still not the prevailing will of the Conservative Party. It may have looked like it, but you've seen time and time again numerous people leave the Conservative Party since 2016 because now of its stance on Europe. Still does not refuse to acknowledge that. And of course, as we've said time and time again, eventually in the Conservative Party, they will have to have a reckoning on Brexit. Sooner or later, they will have to have one. Anyway, Starmer, of course, now with the preference now for coalitions of the willing, has even placed himself in the Bevin tradition. So now is the obvious retort, of course, that Starmer is no Bevin, but one must ask whether anyone else actually is. Stephen Flynn, of course, at Westminster of the Scots Nats, explained during the debate, saying, "Why is this not being extended to Scotland? Why is Grangemouth not being included? Why is the smelter at Lochbar not being included? Why are the Daleshill Steelworks not being included?" The answer is to why they are not being included is that Westminster is only interested in Westminster. It is not interested in Scotland. bear in mind when we did our live stream recently, there is actually a huge plan to do with Grangemouth. It's called Operation Willow. Um, but anyway, there you go. How, of course, wonderful to find Flynn, one of the best debaters in the Commons, calling Starmer out to save Scotland by being a proper unionist. Here, too, is one of the seams of logic of Brexit at work. Only the British government can create the conditions now for Grangemouth and the smelter up at Lockbar to thrive. Again, there is already a plan up for Grangemouth. It's called Operation Willow, but there you go. The saddest face on the government front bench on Saturday belonged to, of course, Ed Miliband, Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero, who looked like a man mourning for his own career, and is now for the doom prophet of universal remedies, which have done no good to Grangemouth or the smelter. Wait a minute. There is a huge plan that was recently published just last month about what they're going to do. This guy knows nothing about what's going on up in Grangemouth. But there you go. Anyway, of course, meanwhile, Richard Trice for Reform complained that Starmer had, of course, stolen Reform's policy, saying that my honourable friend, the member of Clacton, and I have been calling for British Steel to be a strategic national corporation for some 6 years. I do not think they would be all in to go in and properly nationalise British Steel. I do not think it is proper nationalisation. I think it is more that they would want a publicly but privately owned company, just happen to be called British Steel. But there you go. Politics does often require different appropriations of opponents of one's policies, and Starmer, of course, performs such tests with the air of virtue and infuriates his rivals. He wishes to persuade voters that not, of course, Farage or Badenoch is, of course, the true defender of the national interest. It is possible, of course, within a few years that the Labour government will have failed in so many different ways that this claim becomes unsustainable. We're already almost up to our first year in a couple of months. So far, if you want to judge them in the national interest and you want to judge them just on that statistic alone, then they have done probably quite a lot of good stuff that is just in the national interest. If you were to stick to that criteria, they've done quite a lot of good stuff. Otherwise, this guy will be talking about it. This article would be a lot longer. But as you can see, doesn't have anything because he has nothing to say about what his party would do if it was in power. How would it have saved these two blast furnaces? According to Fibs, you should have just forced the sale, which still then, those two blast furnaces would have gone out, meaning any value of that site would have just been useless. But there you go. Anyway, but of course, we can at least, meanwhile, deliver some encouragement from Starmer's belated discovery that he too is a unionist. Trying to sell this as some sort of Brexit benefit is ridiculous, but there you go. Anyway, and the first comment is this. I appreciate the staff shortages, but really? Is this the cream of ConservativeHome thinking, saying, ooh, isn't Starmer awful? Is this just fine, just for an afternoon filler? But the question, of course, isn't around Starmer's patriotism or God help us Brexit. It is about if industries are strategically important and what the Conservatives would have to say about protecting them in a free trade world. This article leans into my concern that the Conservatives have nothing to say of substance, to say anything beyond that Labour is awful and looking at reform and trying to work out how to compete. There is a risk that, of course, Reform, an entirely unserious party, entirely unfit to lead this country, would end up out as the opposition, or even looking for a coalition partner to run the country. The chaos of Trump and Truss would look like a minor blip if the party of amateurs was now left in charge of our nation. Again, he's not bad. He's right to say that. He's very, very right to say that. That here is just the biggest puff piece to say, oh, isn't Starmer bad? Someone says here, after Badenoch's dreadful performance on Saturday's debate, I really do wonder how she can survive as the leader. Very glum faces, arm folded, and very sparsely attended benches now behind her. I guess many of our MPs completely avoided attending, knowing it would be a car crash for her. I read once a commenter describing her as lazy as Johnson, as mad as Truss, and as politically inept as Sunak. I don't know. I didn't know, of course, she was lazy. Um, Yeah, someone else says here, calling out the reforms thing. On the 2nd of January 2023, Farage said British steel should never have been sold to the Chinese. Why should the government now bail the company out now? So the Trice quote in the article appears to be incorrect. The answer to Farage's inconsistency is, of course, he now needs to be seen on the side of the steelworkers before the May elections. But in reality, he couldn't care less about them. And that's right. Bear in mind, Farage massively has voted against all the workers' right protections those steel workers are going to get. And yeah, actually, that's a very interesting point. So this guy, in response to that, says he cares a heck of a lot more of them about the Conservative governments have ever done. So he's a very low bar to jump. This is it. Farage can appear to care. Just remember what happened to the fishermen. The second they stopped being useful, Farage threw them under the bus. Farage have never done anything for the British fishing industry. They were just a useful tool, a useful prop he used, and then when they were no longer useful, he abandoned them. Farage has said pretty much nothing about the British fishing industry, pretty much really after like what 20 what 18 or so. Never mentioned again on the reform platform, never made it a big issue, never made it a thing. So it is doing the same what he did to the fishing industry. Oh, I'm here. Don't I care? Aren't I a man of the people caring about all these people? But you look at his voting record in Parliament, doesn't really seem to care about the people. So, yeah, this is the truth that the Conservatives have nothing to say about this. And bear in mind, I've said this before. You notice he doesn't bring up Ed Davey, by the way. Ed Davey, I think, put in a good performance on Saturday as well. And I will keep on saying this. I think if Ed Davey keeps on with his plan, keeps on going the way that they have been going, they will become the main party of opposition. I just think it's absolutely inevitable. But for that to happen, the Conservative Party has to implode. And oh boy, these May elections are going to be bad. But it's going to be. In fact, we might have to do a video about that maybe next time. But anyway, we'll talk more about that definitely next time. So as always, before we do continue, please thank you very much for watching. Do remember to hit the like, the share button on your way out, and of course, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.